Stop the intro. No, stop the intro. Stop the intro. No. AZALEA. She actually won a tournament. There are those that said it could not be done, and it has been done. AZALEA, the very first Ranger in Flesh and Blood, has won a skirmish event and thereby has achieved living legend points. Today we're going to take a look at that tournament winning AZALEA Blitz deck, kind of go into details, give you my thoughts on it. And if you'd like to hear from the creator and pilot of the deck, Justin Soap, definitely check out the Go Again Gaming Flesh and Blood YouTube channel, personal friend of mine, and 1/3 of the Living Legends podcast. He's gonna have Justin on his channel on the AZALEA Cult segment, talking about the AZALEA deck and his path to victory. But without further ado, let's take a look at this actually tournament winning AZALEA deck. You didn't think it could happen? It happened. And of course, today's video is brought to you by me, Red Zone Rogue. Go ahead and check out the Red Zone Rogue online store for all of your Flesh and Blood and anime card game merch needs. I have a bunch of stuff over there, including this awesome playmat made by Crobius, a Flesh and Blood artist. I even have several other Flesh and Blood playmats and sleeves with art by Flesh and Blood artists, such as our previous splash art, Kodako's Library, designed by Silvia Meleoni, the amazing Flesh and Blood artist, as you can see here. But let's get to today's video. Here we have this first place winning AZALEA deck, of course, sleeved up in Dragon Shield Flesh and Blood sleeves. There are no AZALEA sleeves, so of course we went with the Lexi sleeves. Next best thing, we have the only Ranger sleeve available. Here we have the Lady of the Day, AZALEA herself, and you might not be really familiar with what AZALEA does, because AZALEA is not a top tier popular hero, but she is now a tournament winning hero, which is fantastic. So AZALEA has the standard 20 life and 4 intellect for a Blitz young hero. This is a Blitz deck. The deck in question won a skirmish. She has a once per turn action of you can put a card from your arsenal on the bottom of your deck. If you do, you put the top card of your deck face up into your arsenal. If it's an arrow, it gains dominate until end of turn and then go again. So basically what you do is you swap the card from your arsenal with the top card of your deck, and if that top card is an arrow, it gains dominate. So we really want to set up the top card of our deck with a really powerful arrow to deal as much damage to our opponent, debilitate them, and make it just an uncomfortable time for them as we do that as much as we can. So that's kind of the name of the game with AZALEA, stacking the top of the deck. Now our equipment loadout here is pretty standard. We actually have less than the maximum 11 cards available. We only have a standard 4 equipment loadout plus some different options for your bows. In fact, I included one more bow that wasn't in that top winning deck list. So let's just talk about the equipment loadout really quick. This is very, very standard AZALEA stuff here. We have the Skullbone Cross Wrap. This is a fantastic one for AZALEA. In fact, many AZALEA players would say this is the only headpiece for AZALEA. And fortunately for you out there, if you don't have this, this is probably one of the cheapest legendary equipments you can go find. So great one to get. It's also really versatile. So it has Arcane Barrier 1, great against those arcane damage classes. It has Blade Break, and it has a defensive 1, and has a once per turn action. Turn a face down card in your arsenal face up, opt 1, and then you get to go again. So once again, we really, really care about the top of our deck. Manipulating that top card and being able to opt every single turn is fantastic. Being able to choose if it's, going on the bottom, or if we see, oh, that's a spicy arrow card, time to activate AZALEA and give it dominate. So that is the Skullbone Cross Wrap. Absolutely fantastic. We're also running the Fiendel Spring Tunic. Very, very standard, just good resources over time. And currently this is really the only good option Ranger has for a chest piece. Got my fingers crossed for better options in the future, but currently the Spring Tunic is your best option for Ranger. Blocks for 1, but just gives you those resources over time, which is pretty good. And the deck is really lean. This is a very red line heavy deck. So the 1 resource actually really matters. If you can't afford a Spring Tunic, getting the Blossom of Spring, the one that you just use once to get a resource and destroy it, is a decent replacement for the Spring Tunic. So you do have budget options for this deck if you do not have a Tunic. Next up, we have Perch Grapplers. Perch Grapplers is a 2-block with Blade Break, and that's what it's going to mostly be used for. But if the stars align, we can use this ability of an action for 2 resources, destroy it until end of turn. All of our face-up arrows played from Arsenal gain Go Again, which can be good for your endless arrow shenanigans, but most of the time we're just going to block for 2. And then finally we have Bullseye Bracers. This has Arcane Barrier, which is great for those arcane damage classes, and has an action of destroying it. If you have no cards in your arsenal, you can put an arrow from your hand face up into your arsenal. It gains +1 until end of turn, and then Go Again. So this is your standard loadout, and by standard loadout, this is literally the only loadout that you're going to be bringing. I could see some arguments for swapping the Perch Grapplers for something like Snapdragon Scalers, especially if you're on a budget, but the Grapplers are really good to defend here, and it gives us a decent defense, right? We still have 3 pieces that we can block with, right? And we still have 2 pieces that give us Arcane Barrier. So we still have some defensive options here, but this is just kind of like, you're basically going to play these no matter what. For the weapons, you have a little bit more options, but you're really just going to be playing with the Death Dealer here. Death Dealer has a once per turn action for a resource. If you have no cards in your arsenal, you can put an arrow card from your hand face up into the arsenal. If you do draw a card, Go Again, which is fantastic. So activating this ability with a yellow or blue pitch is great, but honestly, we don't have a lot of yellow or blue pitch cards in this deck. Just replacing the card that you use to activate this is fantastic. We also have Dreadbore, which is the same thing, kind of, but not really. It says once per turn action for a resource, you put an arrow card from your hand face up into an empty arsenal zone you control. If you do, that arrow gains +1 until end of turn, Go Again, and then all arrows you control have defense reactions, cannot be played from hand, this Chain Link. This was not originally in the deck, but I think it's a good option against really, really defensive heavy decks like Oldhim. So if Oldhim becomes popular, I really think Dreadbore can find a place, and you can really make use of this. I actually made good use out of Dreadbore in a Lexi deck that really wasn't built like this deck, and I think this deck is actually built better for Dreadbore. And then finally, this deck uses Redliner. Now, I'm not entirely sure when you'd pull in Redliner other than really taxing decks against really taxing decks like Icelander and maybe an Ice Lexi or something like that, because Redliner is literally the exact same thing as Death Dealer, except it doesn't cost any resources, but also you don't get to draw that card. So it's functionally similar, whereas Dreadbore does have a distinctive function. You're mostly just going to be playing Death Dealer. To be completely honest, this is going to be your loadout like 90% of the time. The actual deck is split 50-50 between attack actions and non-attack actions. And that's because you really, really want to just be shooting off one really scary arrow per turn. There's not a lot of Go Again in this deck, so you want to pump up your arrows, make them have Dominate using Azalea's hero ability, and just, you know, make sure they hit and you give them that debilitating on-hit effect. So let's talk about the arrows first. I guess we'll sneak in this little Easter egg too. So this deck runs Enlightened Strike, and Enlightened Strike is just a staple card. It's a 0 for 5, but you have to put a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck as an additional cost, but you get to choose one. You can either draw a card, give it +2, or give it Go Again, which is great. So you can actually have a decently go-wide turn with E-Strike into an arrow if you want to. You can also just give it, you know, +2 for make it a 0 for 7, which is also pretty good, but E-Strike is just a fantastic card used in a myriad of decks. Probably one of the more expensive cards in the deck here. All right, the first arrow I want to talk about is the Azalea specialization, Red in the Ledger. This card is what makes Azalea even somewhat viable. It is a 1 for 5 arrow, blocks for 3, Azalea spec. It says, if Red in the Ledger hits a hero, they can't play or activate more than one action during their next turn. And in a meta with really, really aggressive go-wide decks, Red in the Ledger is fantastic. It just forces your opponent to, you know, only be able to do one thing in their turn. And if they're the kind of, you know, deck like 5, for example, when they're going to want to be doing like 4 or 5 things, forcing them to only be able to do one thing is absolutely back-breaking. So playing Red in the Ledger, dominating Red in the Ledger, and recurring Red in the Ledger are some core strategies in this deck. We're going to talk about how you do all of those things in just a second. Next up, we have Remorseless, one of the best arrows in the game. It's another 1 for 5, block 3. If it's put into your arsenal face up, which it will almost always be put into the arsenal face up, until end of turn, Remorseless gains defense reactions can't be played from arsenal to Remorseless chain link. And if you are playing with the Dreadbore says that defense reactions can't be played from hand during the chain link. So combination just means defense reactions cannot be played. So that's a pretty good combination if you're playing against a very, very defense reaction heavy hero. But also it says if it hits a hero until the end of turn, whenever they play an action card, they lose 1 life. So they can play more than one. They can play more than one, unlike the Red in the Ledger, but if they do, they're going to be taking a lot of damage. So we run 2 of these. Got to get that white border one in for maximum tilt. Next up we have Fatigue Shot, another 1 for 5. And this one says when it hits a hero, the base attack of the first attack action card they play during their next turn is halved. So this is really, really good against those big, heavy hitting heroes like Bravo, like Oldhim. Not as good against those tiny little death by 1,000 cuts heroes like the ninjas out there, but it's still very good. 1 for 5 and blocks for 3 is fantastic. Next up we have Salvage Shot. This is another 1 for 5. You can kind of see a theme here. Another block 3. If it hits, you put it on the bottom of your deck. So this is one of the only ways that we have a late game recursion strategy because, as you know, Rangers' bows don't attack on their own. So if you're down to fatigue, you're really going to need your salvage shots to do a lot of work. So we're running 2 of those here. Next up we have Sleep Dart. This is one of those cards that is either amazing or does literally nothing. It's a 1 for 5, and when it hits a hero, the opposing hero loses all hero card effects and activated abilities until the end of their next turn. So basically you treat their hero card as though it was blank. So against some heroes like Dash, does nothing. Against other heroes like Levia, it can just straight up kill them. So Sleep Dart is fantastic, but at the end of the day, it's just a solid 1 for 5. We have a lot of 1 for 5s in here. Now we have some 0 cost arrows with Bolton Shot, one of the best arrows in the entire game for Ranger, hands down. 0 for 4, blocks for 3. While Bolton Shot's power is greater than its base power, it gains Go Again, and if it hits, you get to reload, which means if you have no cards in your arsenal, you can put a card from your hand face down into the arsenal. So that's one of the ways you can get cards face down into the arsenal to activate your Skullbone Cross Wrap. There's a couple different ways you can pump this up, and we'll talk about those as time goes on, but Bolton Shot is fantastic. This is one of the cards you really want to see. Another one is Endless Arrow. Another 0 for 4, block 3, and if it hits, you just put it back into your hand. So this is a great card for, dominating, pumping, and just getting it back and getting a lot of value out of Endless Arrow. So it's basically like if it hits draw card, but it's the card you always draw is Endless Arrow. Really, really good. This is a card that's just going to be like demanding blocks from your opponent. Next up we have Ridge Rider Shot. Not a great arrow for attacking, but a pretty good utility arrow. It's a 0 for 4, block 3, and if it is put into your arsenal face up, you get to opt 1. So if you put it face up, using your bow or any other effect that puts things into your arsenal face up, you get opt 1, which is great, and then we can, decide what we want to do if we want to use Azalea to give our next arrow dominate. This itself is a card in the arsenal, so using Azalea's ability from there is really good, because you put this on the bottom, and then put the top card into the arsenal and gets to dominate if it's an arrow. And then finally we have Searing Shot. It's the most basic arrow possible. 0 for 4, blocks for 3, and if it hits a hero, they lose 1 life. So it's almost a 0 for 5. It's just damage. That's what it does. It's just damage. And so those are the arrows that we are running in this deck. Let's talk about the non-attack actions. Well, the other cards, because we have a lot of instants in here too. So the first one I want to talk about is Memorial Ground. This is a key card in the deck. It is a 0 cost instant, and it says put target attack action card with cost 1 or less from our graveyard on the top of our deck. And why is that good? Well, putting it on the top of our deck, say something like Red in the Ledger, putting that from our graveyard to the top of our deck, and then we can activate Azalea's hero ability to swap the arsenal card with the card from the top, or rather the card in the arsenal goes on the bottom of the deck, and then the Red in the Ledger goes down into the arsenal and it gets dominate. So this is a amazing way to recur our really, really powerful arrows like Red in the Ledger and Remorseless. But Red in the Ledger against certain decks with Memorial Ground can kind of like lock your opponent out of the game, especially if they really need to do many things in a turn. If you can Red in the Ledger them and then Red in the Ledger them again, and then, you know, maybe you're super lucky and you can do it a third time, that is, that's back-breaking in Flesh and Blood. So that's one of the ways that Azalea wins, a combination of Memorial Ground and Red in the Ledger. So we are running 2 of these. Next up, we have my very first Flesh and Blood spoiler card, Knock the Death Whistle. This is another card that just makes Azalea even somewhat decent because it's one of the best specializations in the game, in my opinion. It is a 0-cost, blue pitch card, blocks for 3, Azalea specialization. Search your deck for an arrow card, reveal it, and then shuffle your deck, put it on top of the deck. Then you may also reload, then go again. So that basically sets you up perfectly to activate Azalea's ability, putting that card from the top of the deck into the arsenal while putting the arsenal card on the bottom of the deck using Azalea's ability and giving that top card dominate. So Knock the Death Whistle is perfect. It's one of the ways you can go tutor up your Red in the Ledger. So between the 2 Red in the Ledgers, the 2 Knock the Death Whistles, and the 2 Memorial Grounds, we sort of have about 6 Red in the Ledgers in the deck. So very good. Next up, we have some pump cards. Another one of my preview cards. Seek and Destroy. This is a 0+3, but this one only blocks for 2. We're going to see a lot of 2 blocks now. So it says, the next arrow attack this turn gains +3, and if it hits a hero at the beginning of their next end phase, they discard all cards in their hand and destroy all cards in their arsenal. So combining that with Red in the Ledger is really backbreaking because it makes it so they can't really play a lot, and so they're going to have to, you know, either choose to play the card in their arsenal, discarding their hand, or losing the card in their arsenal. It puts them in a really tough spot. So Seek and Destroy is just great. And also, at the end of the day, it's just a 0+3, which is really good. Speaking of which, we have Take Aim, the classic 0+3. 0, the next Ranger attack action card you play this turn gains +3. Reload, go again. Blocks for 2. Does everything we want to do. Gives us a +3, gives us a reload. Excellent stuff. The reload is super good because it puts the card face down, so you can put the card face down and then use your Skullbone Crosswrap to turn it face up to opt to see what the top card of the deck is, to determine whether or not you want to actually use Azalea's hero ability. Next up, we have more opt stuff with Read the Glide Path. This is a 0+3, but you also get an opt. So literally it just says your next arrow attack this turn gains +3, opt 1, go again. Very simple. Give you a +3, you get an opt 1. Like I said, it's all about setting up the Azalea abilities. So yeah, we are running the reds. We're also running the yellows. Does the exact same thing, but it gives you a +2, but you still get an opt, which is great. Next up, we have one of the best Ranger cards ever with Rain Razors. It's a 0, and it just says arrows have +2 while attacking this turn. Now, this is actually really good in go-wide decks, specifically with Lexi, but in this deck, it's also still pretty good as a surprise +2. A lot of folks won't see it coming because, you know, Azalea usually focuses on these pre-pumps, but having this instant speed pump is pretty good. Also, this is good for giving surprise go again to your Bolton Shot because Bolton Shot will get go again and that reload trigger if its power is bigger than its base power, which it will be if you play the Rain Razors. So good stuff here. Rain Razors is amazing. You put this in literally every single Ranger deck. Now we have some defensive options, and we're running a decent amount of defensive options here, and they're pretty good. So first up, we have Oasis Respite. This is one of the best defensive options in the entire game, in my opinion. It's a 1 cost, it's an instant. You prevent the next 4 damage that will be dealt to target hero this turn by a source of your choice. If they have less life than each other hero, they may gain a life. What makes this so good is that in Blitz, you have no sideboard, so it's great against every hero. Basically, it's good against Wizard, it's good against Guardian, it's great against everything. And because it's an instant, you can kind of get around dominate effects. So Oasis Respite is really good. In fact, this is one of the cards that you're going to be very wary of playing this deck because this will be a tough card for you when you're trying to slam on in with Red in the Ledger and they Oasis Respite to prevent a lot of it. Next up, we have Feign Death. This card is way better than it looks. It is a 1-cost card, yellow pitch. It's an instant. Play Feign Death only if your hero has been dealt damage this turn. The next time your hero would be dealt damage this turn, prevent it. So it's really good against those massive, explosive wizard turns. If they're coming in with Blazing Aether for like 8, 9 damage or something like that, you can Feign Death it because you've already taken some damage this turn. It's also really good against Rune Blades. You can take 1 damage from a Rune Chant and then prevent a big, massive attack. Feign Death is just really good. Against other decks, it's not great. You know, against Guardian, it's not great. But in those cases, you can use it as a yellow pitch card. And then finally, we have Take Cover. Once again, this is a yellow pitch card, 0 cost. It's a Ranger defense reaction, blocks for 3, and it just has reload. So this is a good way to just block on our opponent's turn and then reload and put, you know, a card into our arsenal face down. So we can start our turn by activating our Skullbone Crosswrap and then trying to see where we are from there. I want to be very, very, how do I put this? Very, very clear with how you should play some of this stuff. Be super careful not to put dead cards into your arsenal, because unlike Lexi, you will not have 2 arsenal zones. So if you put a card into your arsenal that it's difficult for you to play, like, well, you can always play the Rain Razors, but there's just some things in your arsenal, like you don't want to get stuck with a Take Cover in there and your opponent just doesn't attack you, or like a Feign Death or something like that. You have a way out. Like you can always activate AZALEA. We call that doing a blind AZALEA, just activating her, putting the card from your arsenal on the bottom and put the top card into the arsenal, but just be careful. Like, this deck does require a lot of skill to pilot. There's a reason that this is the first deck that has won a tournament with AZALEA. She is not easy to pilot, but if you want to challenge and if you want to have a fun time, an incredibly flavorful time, I highly recommend playing AZALEA. There's a reason that people love this hero. She's cool, she has a lot of flavor, and it's like a nice puzzle. And until recently, had never won an event, and that can no longer be said. AZALEA has Living Legend points in Blitz. Thank y'all so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of this AZALEA deck. If you're going to give it a shot, I would say give it a shot if you got the cards, and definitely check out the interview with the creator of this deck over on Go Again Gaming. I believe he's going to be posting it the Wednesday after this video goes live. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. We'll see you later.